have fish thrown at us at Pike Place Market and things like that.
Welcome to the Exploring Washington State podcast. Here's your host, Scott Cowan.
All right, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Exploring Washington State podcast. My guest today is Brian Naron. And before we get started, I need to tell Brian something. Brian, you are the first repeat guest on the show. Out of over 140 some episodes that we've recorded, you are the first person to come back for an encore.
Wow, that's great.
I don't know if that's something you should be embarrassed by or proud of, but we did four shows with Wands, but those were sequential, dealing with decades. You were here last year about your Metalworks book, and now we're back to talk about building an empire. The story of Queensrÿche. But the other thing, and I don't know if we covered this last time, but you are also the person out of all the guests that I've known the longest.
This is true.
So it's just kind of. You're not the oldest guest, but I've known you the longest. So for that, I apologize in advance. But welcome back, Brian.
Thanks.
And
thanks, Scott.
So let's catch up. Last time we talked, you published a Yellow Pages size book on the heavy metal scene in the Northwest, and it was quite interesting to talk to you about that.
Rusted Metal.
How did that book go for you guys?
It is going still.
Awesome. Okay.
We did a limited edition of 50 hardbacks with a slipcover, numbered, autographed by several people who did interviews with us. But we have sold over 1,100 of the paperbacks, which is surprising and gratifying all at the same time, because it's such a niche book. Talking about the Northwest, we found 1,000 people that really wanted to know more about the Pacific Northwest hard rock and metal scene. And not so surprising is, I don't know the percentage, but I know there's a really healthy percentage of those book sales that were in Europe.
Oh, very cool. Okay. All right. Well, first off, congratulations. A self-published book, 1,100 sales. That's really significant. I know a lot of people that have published books, and writing a book is not something that you will get rich from doing.
No.
Unless you are one of the, 1% of the 1%, niche things. So very cool. Building an empire. How did this happen? What did you guys decide to do this book? And what was let's start there. What was your background?
Well, after spending 6.5 years on the Rusted Metal, because it was such a huge undertaking, it was more time and editing than we thought we were ever going to do. But we were so energized by the time it was done. James and I looked at each other. James Beach, the main writer of the book, was just like, well, what's next? And immediately Queensrÿche came to our minds. The band is 40 years in and have never had a biography written about them. And I know quite a bit about the band, have followed the band since really their inception before they were actually Queensrÿche. So it seemed like that was the natural direction to go. We had talked about maybe doing a line of Northwest hard rock metal books on different bands, and that's what we plan on doing in the future.
Okay. Well, we'll come back to that when we're done talking about this one then. So 40 years in, no biography. That does seem a little weird in today's media crazed, every band that's been around for decades released, some, there's always stuff about them all. So But this was an unauthorized biography, right?
Yeah.
You guys weren't, so you didn't have the quote unquote official blessing of the members of the band.
That's correct.
So how was it to gain access to the materials? How did that work for you guys?
Well, first and foremost, like I was saying, I've been a fan of the band since before they were called Queensrÿche. And Brian Heaton, our other writer, he had a message board, and then he has a website dedicated to the band. And James has been a fan for a long time as well, and we just decided that this was the book we were going to do. The band, we tried to get the band's attention about the Rusted Metal book to see if they'd like to do some interviews. We didn't even get a decline. They just never really answered us back. We went through management, through their social media person. I am friends with some of their friends, and so they knew about it. They just opted not to do it, which is fine. I mean, there's a lot of biographies that are written where the band isn't participating. But it was not difficult to get the information we needed. In fact, it was probably easier to do this book without the band and trying to get certain quotes from them and information from them. While they weren't as huge as the Rolling Stones and AC/DC, they were a pretty big band. And for years and years, they did a lot of interviews. And so there was a lot of material out there on the webs, but even in just the materials that I had collected and had, there was just a plethora of quotes. So we were able to take, with the permission of the writers of these articles, we were able to build our narrative through the quotes that those gentlemen had spoken since 1983. Excuse me. And then we also, even though we didn't have the band's direct participation in this, we did have some family members, we had some friends, we had former employees, we had promoters, we had friends, and people kind of in the business who were more than willing to talk to us and give us some really great information, tell us some really fun stories. Our goal was to tell a story that was more than the stock narrative about this band. East Side band, put out their own record, caught the eye of this person, and away they went. There was just so much more to talk about, sort of to build the story. And with my connections to the band and Brian Heaton's connections to the band, both kind of in business and just in fandom, there was just we just had a lot of resources at our fingertips, as it were.
Okay. So how long was? So you mentioned earlier the other book was what, six years plus in the making?
6 years from the first interview till the last edit. Yeah, but it was 902 pages.
Well, this one's 300 and some, Brian. I was going to give you a hard time saying, are you selling the books by the pound? Because these are not quick little reads for people. These are massive tomes, which is great.
Yeah. Well, again, it's we could have made the book bigger, but it worked out good. It worked out good at the size it was in. Repeat that question again.
Well, how long did it take you for the Queensrÿche book, for building an empire? How long was it from, the team committing, we're going to do this, to the last?
So the Rusted Metal book came out in November of 2020, but we'd finished writing it back in July of 19, but it took a year and a half to edit it. When COVID hit, I had just started a new job, and suffice it to say, they had to circle the wagons, and so they laid me off after a couple of weeks. And so I had all this time on my hands to try to find another job, certainly. But I was off 17 weeks from work. And that was about the time James and I were talking about, boy, it doesn't get any better. While we're waiting for the edits and the book being printed, let's start the next book. And so in March of 2020, we started writing. We already had kind of a framework within about 2 weeks, and we just sort of started hanging stuff off the tree, as it were. And so we finished writing the book the last week of June of 21, and did the final edits by the second week of July, and then the book went to press. We got it to mid-October in time for an event that we hosted, a signing event that we hosted.
Were you guys able to actually have the event? Were you, with COVID?
We did.
Were you able to?
We did. And we just we had masks and hand sanitizer and asked people to observe everybody else's
social
space
distance.
and the event was kind of like a tribute to the band. We called it the Reichian Archives. So it was a convention room full of memorabilia, like a museum to Queen.
And where was that? Where did you guys hold that at?
We held that up in Snohomish. The band was playing at the Snoqualmie Casino on the 23rd of October, and we were at a hotel less than 10 minutes away from the venue, hosting our first book signing, and then showing off a pretty sizable collection of Queensrÿche music memorabilia.
Okay. Well, you and I have talked before off mic and all that about your record collection and your memorabilia collection, which I'm still trying to peel pieces away from you here and there. We'll talk about that later. But was a lot that was being displayed yours, or was it from all your authors, or were you gathering and curating from other collectors?
We did have four other people who brought some items with them to this event. Brian from Sacramento, he brought a few things. Another super fan who lives in Puyallup let us use some things, and then probably one of the bigger collectors from Peoria, Illinois, Mike the Riker. He brought a bunch of stuff out, and so it was 5 of us who had parts of our collection, but most of it was mine. Yes.
So people are bringing stuff from Illinois to okay. Yeah. That's cool. Yeah. That's really cool. So did you guys go to the show that they were playing then? Okay.
We did, and we were able to hand over some books to a couple of members of the band, and I believe everyone has gotten one of the books. All of the original members and a couple of the new members have gotten copies of the book, and we did get some feedback through a family member that at least one of them thought it was a pretty fair telling of their story and was not disappointed and fairly happy with how it turned out.
Okay. So for someone who's not a Queensrÿche fan, why don't you give us the Queensrÿche for Dummies version of their career?
Sure.
So let's just kind of do this the career arc here, as told by Brian Naron.
Okay, well, the East Side, Bellevue area, Redmond, was kind of a hotbed in the early '80s for music, hard rock, metal, and there were a few places there, but primarily we're talking about the Lake Hills roller rink. That venue had been open since the 50s, hosting skating and then live music from the 50s on up. And these 5 original guys all met at some point about 1981. Jeff Tate, the singer, was from Tacoma, but really of the world. He was born in Germany. His family did some moving. His father worked for the government, and but the rest of the members of the band, for most of their formative years, were in the Bellevue, Redmond area, and the 5 of them all were drawn to music, to the instruments, either because they had older siblings that were into music, or they had friends. These guys saw each other play in other bands, and the thing about these 5 were that they were exceptional performers, exceptional players who somehow found the others, and they were the best of what they did. Jeff Tate has got a soaring voice, and everybody wanted Jeff in their band, and the 2 guitar players were well practiced, had just real natural skills. Bass player and the drummer, Eddie and Scott, were just phenomenal players. They were just the best players in their community, and they happened to get together, and they put together a tape that was unlike the quality of music that most bands from this area were able to play, because they were just superior musicians, and the songwriting was really good. And I remember hearing the tape for the first time in Easy Street Records. The guys had the tape, and they're kind of schlepping it around and going to record stores, see if anybody's interested in wanting to maybe help them distribute the tape. I just happened to be in Easy Street Records on Belred Road one day, and Kim Harris, who was the owner of the store, he said to me, he says, "You want to hear this band I'm thinking about managing?" And I'm like, "Sure, of course." And Kim and his wife Diana Vaughn had been pretty big players in the music community, as far as promotion of bands and artistic direction of bands. Kim had college records, which was in the Ave, and then he moved it out to Belred Road and called it Easy Street. So he puts this tape in on the house speakers, and it's a 4-song tape, which became what's called the 206 EP. And when the music was over, I kind of giggled, and I looked at him and I said, "Local band, huh?" And he says, "Yeah, these guys, this is the real deal. These guys are local." And I've heard a lot of local music, and there was just never anybody that as good as this. I mean, this was like professional recording. Their songwriting was so good. The singer was so great. And he says, no, these guys are the real deal. They're called the Mob, and they've got this guy who filled in and was singing on it. And I think it's great. And Diana and I we're gonna try to get somebody to listen to this and put what they ended up doing is they took a shopping junket to Europe, and they went to the offices of Kerrang magazine, and which was a premier hard rock metal magazine out of England at the time. And they dropped off a copy of the tape. It ended up on a pile of, a whole bunch of other tapes of bands who wanted to be heard. Fortunately for them, a writer for them named Paul Suter picked up the tape, listened to it, and in one of the next couple of issues, he wrote a half-page article about he has seen the future of heavy metal, and it's this band called Queensrÿche out of the state of Washington. And just on the strength of this review, the Easy Street started getting bombarded with letters and postcards. No one had heard this music, but just based on a writer who people listened to, they got all this interest. So Kim and Diana decided to press the record up independently, and they just sold them out. And they printed up some more, and they sold them out. Eventually, Seattle and Portland radio started playing the Sonata out of the EP. And
let me interrupt you. What Seattle stations picked the EP up? Was that KISW?
KSW and KZOK, KUFO and KGON in Portland. And then there was a couple of radio stations actually in Texas that picked it up and really ran with it. So they got on. They had actually won a contest to get a video done, and through that they were asked to open up a couple of shows, a couple of Rising Star shows in the early 80s. It was a series of shows where bands would come in, and for $1 or $2 you could buy a ticket, and you could see Tom Petty or Angel City or Sammy Hagar in their formative years. And a band called Zebra was doing a show in Portland and Seattle, and it wasn't selling very well. And they announced Queensrÿche was the opener, and they sold out both shows just because of the radio play they've gotten in those two cities. They sold both those shows out in less than 24 hours after that.
So question, let me interrupt you. Question here. So Rising Star shows, we talked about those before. You and I have attended several of them and all that. But when I was reading through the book, was I correct in picking up that it wasn't just the Rising Stars just weren't in Seattle? They actually did the same sort of series in Portland as well with another radio station.
Yeah, and I think I
had no idea.
I think some of those were also like on the West Coast, San Francisco. Yeah,
I always just assumed that it was just KISW's brilliant idea, and which is really naive of me when I think about. Oh yeah, so a band will just come up to Seattle. They got nothing better to do than go play at the Paramount.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So Zebra wasn't selling real well, so they put Queensrÿche on and they sold out.
Yep.
And away we go.
Yeah, and so it just built from there. So with the experience that Kim and Diana had with managing bands, and they knew the right people. The EP, of course, is amazing for those who have listened to it and still listen to it. On the strength of that EP and the experience and guile of Kim and Diana, they set in motion the band. They got onto some tours, and they just started winning over people, and so as just time went on, they did their first album in England, and that got them more notoriety, and they just kept touring because that's what bands have to do. You got to get in front of people because that's how they get known, and two, that's where you make your money is out on the road because, record sales, you get a penny or two per sale and move on. And so they just built it. As they went along, and they got better tours, and eventually Kim and Diana parted company with Queensrÿche as far as management, due to all the usual reasons, and also because the band was outgrowing them and wanted to go with someone who could really get him into the stratosphere, and that's what they ended up doing. They got signed by Q Prime, the same management company like Metallica had, and so they got him bigger tours and more exposure on award shows. But that happens too because you're good songwriters, and you develop your craft, and you reach more people. And the thing about the band too is they never stayed the same. They never sort of repeated the same record, and sometimes that was a surprise for a lot of people because some fans like it the same way. They just want the music to never change, and they were explorers. They were looking to stretch the limits of progressive music, and they've made a good career out of doing that. And like all bands, they're like families. You've got ups, you got downs, and people have come and gone, but they're still an entity, and they've got some new players in the mix, and they're still putting out quality music.
So, Chris DeGarmo. So the only two names that I remember are DeGarmo and Jeff Tate. I'm not, I can name maybe 3 or 4 of their songs. So I am not, a Queensrÿche fan. When did DeGarmo leave the band? Because he was the first member to leave, right?
Yes. Chris DeGarmo started the band. He was the main songwriter. Through his development as a songwriter, that raised the band quite a ways. And as the band got more popular and internal and external pressures, as far as you've got to do another record, they want to do something different, but they certainly want to keep stepping up the ladder. He kept producing. He kept kind of the base of the band going, and Michael Wilton was another strong songwriter in the band. Jeff Tate wrote a lot of lyrics. Eddie Jackson and Scott Rockenfield, bass and drummer. They did some writing, but they weren't as prominent in the band early on. And they again, they were playing bigger venues and creating more music, more complex music. These guys are starting to make some money, but they didn't do headlining tours on their own for extended periods of time until after the Operation Mindcrime album. So that they'd been a band for 6 or 7 years really before they carried the load, as it were. But in that time, you start making some money, you start buying houses and cars, and you find your first and second and third wives, and all the things that go along with that, and kids, and then invariably people want different things. It used to be a band of 5, and then everybody's got different expectations. They've got different pressures. they can't contribute like they used to, or what have you. It's just like, again, like a family. And
Right.
I think with Chris, he got down to 1997, the Here and the Now Frontier album. Again, really diverse record, real different, stripped down. He had been taking on a lot more of the songwriting over the course of the album before, which was Empire and Promised Land. He was carrying more of the load while other people were, working together. But, it was becoming clear that he was kind of the engineer of the train kind of thing. And I think it got to the point where he was carrying too much of the load and was seeing how the rest of the band were having difficulties maintaining their personal lives, their financial lives, even maybe their musical, wellspring were drying up. And he made a personal decision to step away. And he's never said why, and he probably never will. This band has always been very quiet about their business. Most of the stuff that went on with the band, a lot of people just never knew about, because they kept it to themselves. Some of us know things because we know people and know the band and have first and second and third hand information. But when we wrote the book, we chose to keep it a positive book and keep the messiness out of it. I mean, we didn't want to do a salacious book at all. We just wanted to celebrate the band, and the book is definitely about perseverance, about building something and losing a part of it, whether it be a member of the band leaving, and then building back, and still creating quality music, and they still have a fan base that's pretty loyal. And but yeah, Chris decided to go in '97. He had, in the meantime, had learned to fly airplanes, and now is a commercial pilot and owns a couple of planes, and life needed to be quieter for Chris DeGarmo. And but the band continued on. They enlisted an old friend, musician, producer, Kelly Gray, to take over for him. They spent a few years together creating an album. And then Kelly ended up just being more of a songwriter and producer for the band. And they've had a succession of 3 additional guitar players over the course of from 99 to 2021.
Right.
And Jeff Tate is no longer in the band. In 2012, the last remaining 3 members of the original Mob band had come to an impasse with Jeff and management, and decided to fire him. And it's well documented in the book, a lot of the reasons why, and nothing that's not been.
Well, I remember just hearing that they went to court, and for a while both groups could use the name Queensrÿche, and then they ultimately settled and things like that. And that's unfortunately that's not the first time we've heard of a band member suing another band member, and creative differences and life gets in the way. People grow in different ways. So I'm gonna pause you on your story and put you on the spot. How many times have you seen Queensrÿche?
34 times.
Are you sure? Not 33, not 35. Are you sure it's 34? Okay.
I just documented my last show.
Okay. So you've documented okay. When was the first time you saw him, and where was that at?
It was in October of 1983 when the band was on. Where they were on basically their first big tour. They opened up for Ronnie James Dio at the Paramount, and
Okay.
so that's the first time I got to see them live. Yes.
How are they live? Are they a good band live?
They're a great band. They're exceptional. Even in the years where maybe the album output, the songs were not as strong as their heyday, they were always really fine musicians, always putting out a good quality live performance. And even the players who have come in over time to replace members, the original members who have moved on, all top-notch performers. So yes, so they're always really, really good. That's one of the things that makes that band, exceptional, is their ability to play well.
So 34 shows. You saw them at the Paramount. Where else have you seen them at in Washington? I guess out of 34, have they all been in Washington, or have you followed them anywhere?
I've seen them a few times in Oregon, but most of the times that I've seen them, yes, they've been in the state of Washington. I've seen them play, or members of the band play, the Coliseum. I've seen them at the Catwalk, and when Jeff did a solo gig, it was a little goth club down by Occidental Park. I've seen Michael Wilton's Soulbender at Rock Sport in West Seattle.
Okay.
But most of the time that I saw them at NAF Studios when they introduced their new guitar player in 1999. But yeah, it's usually been the Arena or the Coliseum or the Paramount or Moore Theater.
Did you ever see them at the Gorge or Tacoma?
I saw them in Tacoma one time when they were opening up for AC/DC in '86.
Oh, you make reference to that in the book.
Well, I sort of saw them for a couple of songs.
Right. So I'll just go on record and say I don't like shows at the Tacoma Dome. I just don't.
Yeah.
There's something about that venue that
it's not my favorite venue.
Yeah. Did you see him at the Gorge?
I did not. The couple of tours where they did the Gorge shows, I opted for the Portland show.
I was just curious where I'm going with this line of interrogation is, how are they in a really big setting? So like the Gorge, the Tacoma Dome, those are it's still Seattle Center. Are they better like at the Paramount or the Moore for perform? I mean,
I think.
Does that make sense?
I know exactly what you're saying. I think that they could play anywhere, and they reach people the same way. It's like if you're in a big arena, there's some bands even if you're in the nosebleed, you're like, wow, you're just. I see them down there, but I'm not having this experience. I feel like I could have just stayed home and watched TV. But they were always the kind of band that when Jeff would sing, or Todd LaTorre now, I mean, they're singing to the guy in the back seat, in the back row. I mean, they usually put on a good live performance. They usually mix in the live music with multimedia going-ons behind them, projection screens and lighting that's usually pretty creative and unique. Nothing beats seeing a band in an intimate setting, of course, like the Moore Theater, or even a smaller venue. But some bands can project better in big arenas. Kiss, Iron Maiden. I mean, those are Rush did. I mean, like with Rush, I don't know that I'd want to be in the first two rows. I always liked Rush further back because you could take it all in, and Queensrÿche has always done a really good job of presenting their music with the visual element, and part of that is because some of their music, especially Operation Mindcrime, which was a concept album, but a lot of their music is thematic, so the visual imagery helps tell the story as they're performing it, and it just makes for a much better experience.
I'm on page 192 of your book. Can you tell me what's on that page?
No,
I'm just kidding.
I can't.
I don't need to. But basically, it says here, when Queensrÿche reached its commercial pinnacle in the early 90s, many hardcore Rikers became just like the Deadheads, Fishheads, and Rush Rats before them. Having gone to many Grateful Dead shows and a lot of Fish shows, did you ever go to a Dead show?
I have
ever
not
been to a Dead show. Did you ever see Fish?
No. Okay.
I know you saw Rush. And I saw Rush in 1980, and I don't recall. Did you go with us did you go with Don Cook? Did you go in 1980?
I did go. I went with Kevin Corp, Dale Riker, and the fourth person escapes me. I don't remember who it was.
Yeah, Don Cook and I don't remember who. So
it was Dale Hazeman.
Oh my gosh, there's a name I haven't heard in a long time.
The four of us.
Oh, okay. We won't go down the Franklin Pierce High School reunion tour for this episode. So what was it like? I mean, was there kind of, in your opinion, because you saw him so many times, was there this kind of fan culture that existed outside of the venues before a show?
Yeah. There was and is to some extent, not so much now, but a lot of my friends these days I have a number of friends that I've met through Queensrÿche, people from other parts of the country who would come out here to see Seattle, and the band did a pretty good job of doing like fan events, and they would have fan club only shows where they would debut new music, but fans just themselves in general would just get together. They'd want to come to Seattle, and we were all kind of networking even before the internet, and we'd meet up, and we'd go up to Seattle and do the Space Needle and go to Snoqualmie Falls and have fish thrown at us at Pike Place Market and things like that. And so us being local, we would be hosting these people from several, from different countries in the world and every state in the union. And the band recognized that. And in the early 90s, I'm trying to remember when they officially started it. There was some rumblings in the early mid 90s about getting through the fan club. They called them Empires, and that was a play on the album Empire, where they would, local chapters of the fan club would develop their own logo. They would elect officers. They would have meetings, and oftentimes they were getting together to go to shows when the band would come to their town, but they were also getting together and doing charity work and cleanups and that kind of thing, and just Queensrÿche being kind of the focal point, and they'd sort of report in about what they were doing, and in the fan club magazines they would spotlight different empires across the country and the world, and just talk about what they were doing, and they always, the fans were always an extension of the band, so to speak, and so the band kind of went with that, and helped create this community, and that was kind of unique in the sense of, it seemed to be a little bit more organized and after a while and less organic, but but the band was always kind of ahead of the curve when it came to technology. They were one of the first bands to embrace the internet and use the internet for communicating with the fans, with getting involved with software for gaming related to the band. Even just the, some instrumentation they developed with partnering up with Epiphone and some other guitar makers to create some unique guitars for them and other recording equipment. So the band has always just kind of been on the cutting edge of technology and social media, and again, kind of interesting because the band has always been real quiet. Again, they've always just kept it about the band and not about the band's business, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was reading. I mean, we laugh. Technology doesn't age well, right? And so there's the Queensrÿche CD-ROM game, and it's just you kind of chuckle at how outdated that sounds. Yeah. But if you go back to when that was released, that was very cutting
edge. It was,
and
there was an unreleased song that if you got through it all, you got to hear this song that was only available on that CD-ROM.
See,
unfortunately, put the CD-ROM in my computer now, and it doesn't do anything.
Right, but the cool thing when you think about this is that I just appreciate the fact that they were leveraging technology as it was advancing throughout their career. You think about this, band launches in '83, they're still playing in 2022. 40 years of technology improvements. When you saw them in '83, did you hold a lighter up? And now we all hold our cell phones up with a fake lighter, and it's, and then I was, you mentioned, or it's mentioned in the book, they had a taping section, which just sounds quaint, doesn't it? Taping section. We used to go to a lot of Dead shows, and they had their own taping section, and it was absolutely comical. How geeky the people were. It was typically guys, so I'll say guys. How geeky the guys were taping a Dead show, right? And so I can only imagine Queensrÿche had similar geekiness about it. And now, once again, I hold up my iPhone, and it's all right here in a device that's in the palm of my hand, and we're all just like, yeah, okay. And so they've adapted, and they were going on, because one of the things you guys reference is that I don't know what tour it was, I can't remember that, but the multimedia was laser discs. And I just chuckle because I haven't thought of a laser disc in 20 years. But back in the day, those were super high tech. When they first came out, that was pretty crazy.
Yeah, and so the band is always, I think they've always been looking to be different, always looking at what can they do to help enhance their sound and their look. And certainly their look has gone from being clichéic to garish to,
well, they're in their 50s, if not 60s.
Yeah, all these guys are at 60 or a little older now. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, the long hair and the leather pants don't look good when you're.
Yeah, but they still wear it pretty well, but.
Yeah. See.
But anyway, it's.
I sure wouldn't pull that look off. We'll all be thankful that I don't try to pull that look off. Yeah. We're obviously not going to give away too much of the book, so people can obviously, they should check it out, because it's in depth. Let's put it that way. It's in depth. And I think you guys, once again, did a fabulous job of documenting Washington State band and all of that. So I want to put you, Brian Naron, on the spot. I had and do you know a guitar player by the name of Chris Klemecki?
I do not.
Do you know Chris? Okay, so Chris is Chris, a guy out of Seattle, and he's currently playing guitar in a band called Grieve the Astronaut, which is a friend of mine's band and kind of a prog rock. Quite an interesting project. It's very, very cool. They're doing a really cool job. So Chris and I, when we were talking, so I'm going to ask you your answer to this question, and then I got another one for you. So he shared, and I can't remember what he shared with what his favorite Van Halen song was, and so I shared what my favorite Van Halen song was, which was DOA, which he kind of looked at me like, really, like that's a odd favorite Van Halen song. So, question to you first off, your favorite Van Halen song?
It's got to be Eruption. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, that's
All
the
right.
first thing I ever heard. And it just blew my mind. And I went out and bought the 8-track from the school, the school store. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I won't ask you your favorite Queensrÿche song, because that's probably I don't want to put you on the spot. How about this one? What's their most underrated song in your opinion?
Most underrated song?
Yeah.
There's a ton of them.
Okay.
I think All I Want from Here in the Now Frontier. It's the one and only song that Chris DeGarmo did vocals on, played piano. It sounds like John Lennon. Amazing song. And Surgical Strike from Rage for Order. It's a really powerful, really techno, heavy, really ahead of its time song. Most of Promised Land was an album that came out in the end of 1994, early 95. Really dark and brooding album. Boy, there's a lot of music out there from that band that could have and should have been singles, but weren't.
Okay. Well, since you kind of said you'd answer the question, what's your favorite Queensrÿche song?
The first song I think about is "Take Hold of the Flame" from The Warning,
okay.
And it's basically a song about hope. It's a song about reaching out for what you want and doing whatever it takes to get it, and that was something that was it's important in every generation. Every generation has its challenges, and I think there always has to be a take hold of the flame. There always has to be, a song of hope. That it as dark as it might be, there's always going to be this light you can get after, and make it right and live in that. And so that's what that song always meant to me.
Okay. In doing a little bit of prep for this conversation, I was on Queensrÿche's website and looking around and listening to some music most of the afternoon today. And I see that they're playing in Everett in opening up for Judas Priest shortly.
Yep.
So I think it's interesting. Now, granted, this is Judas Priest's 50th anniversary. I mean, that's kind of mind-boggling when you think about it. But isn't it? Why do you think that they're still willing to open up for these iconic metal bands? I mean, I would think that they have earned the right to be the headliners themselves. Do you think that it's because they pay tribute to the influences?
Partly that is, they gave up their opening slot in a Vegas residency for next March with the Scorpions to do this Priest tour. I think that kind of where they're at is as a band, where they're popular, where they're their popularity is, where their demographic is. I think it's important to sort of group up bands, and certainly, Judas Priest has seniority, but for Queensrÿche, it's less costly to tour that way, but get the message out. So I think it's a good package, and I think that they're looking to reach more people because they're trying to build again. They're nowhere near where they used to be, and probably never will. So it's smart money to go on tour, and they usually do their own headlining tours and having newer or less popular bands open up for them. But this is an opportunity for them to do a world tour and not have to pay for it out of their own pocket.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. I hadn't thought about it in those terms. We're gonna put a pin in Queensrÿche here because, and we haven't even scratched the surface, man. I'm scrolling through your book here, and I'm just like, wow. And so, where did most of the graphics in this book come from? I mean, I'm looking at a lot of concert posters, ticket stubs. Some of them, like this one's credited to Brian Woodwick. But where is this? Where do you get them? Is this all from your guys' collections?
It's some things from our collections. Some things were promotional materials. You mentioned Brian Woodwick, who's I think of him as a pretty prominent photographer in the Pacific Northwest, but I think he's a bit underground. But he does fabulous work, and he was more than willing and eager, really, for us to show off some of his work in our book. We got permissions from Richard Galbraith to use pictures in the book, back page pictures. Of course, we paid him a fee, but he could have charged a great deal more money. But we struck a bargain, and he really loved the project. The cover art, the picture of the band was an original from another photographer popular in the 80s, Robert John. Our digital artist and guy who put the book together for us did the logos and the dark clouds in the background, and there's a few little Easter eggs in the picture, and so we gathered up images that we felt would help us tell the story. We borrowed, we asked, we paid, and again, a lot of this was from my collection. A lot of this was from other people's collections, who were again eager to supply them and get credit for them. And our contributors received copies of the book and thank yous, and the one thing too, going into this book, like I mentioned earlier, we wanted to tell a more expanded story, a more deep, enriching kind of story about the band, because they'd always just had this, like I say, a stock story. But we really wanted to make sure that we gave the people, the readers, the fans, information and images they'd never seen before. And I learned a ton. I mean, I thought I knew a bunch about this band, but the time we spent writing this book and doing the research, I learned so much more about my favorite band.
So tell me something you learned that caught you by surprise.
Well, just I learned some things about how they went about doing some recordings, the amounts of money they spent on these recordings. It's crazy for, they spent $30,000 to record 3 seconds of underwater drums. Yeah.
What?
Yeah. Or, there's without giving away things. There's the 4 images of the band when they first went to England. They're in Heathrow Airport, and these were images that were supplied to us by another collector, probably the biggest collector of Queensrÿche, Thomas Broglie. He's in Switzerland, and he had purchased a lot of Queensrÿche memorabilia, and at the bottom of the box were these 4 photos, and no one had ever seen them before, but they were pictures of the band, them walking through the airport and at customs, and it was things like that where, we wanted the casual fan to go, oh wow, this is pretty neat, I'm learning stuff. But we wanted the hardcore fan to also go, oh my gosh, I had no idea about this. Another one of my favorite things that we learned, there's always been this assumption that when the first band, the Mob, which were Chris, Michael, Scott, and Eddie, were a cover band, and they were doing Judas Priest songs and Scorpions and Van Halen and Iron Maiden songs. And there's always been an assumption that they only played 5 or 6 gigs before they sort of disappeared and really honed their crafts and wrote these first 4 songs. Well, we found out that their very first gig, they had a singer who did 1 gig with them, and it was at the Ellensburg Juvenile Detention Center.
What?
They played.
That's called Central Washington University.
Yeah,
sorry, that was a bad joke.
So
why are they playing music at a juvenile detention? I mean,
the story has it that they were looking to do a gig, and one of the parents was able to make this gig happen. So they played in this auditorium with a bunch of juvenile delinquents, and it went down really well, and there was a lot of screaming and chair throwing, and just like a rock concert. And so I had never heard that before, but we got it corroborated, and yeah. So
wow.
There's just all kinds of fun stuff. One of the more, we had an interview that we had done with Kim Harris. He was a really, really great guy. He passed away this last October. We had done a big interview for the Rusted Metal book, and he was looking forward to the Queensrÿche book. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get a copy of it to him before he passed, but that was a really great interview. We learned a lot of stuff about kind of the inner workings of the band. Chris DeGarmo's brother, Mark, has been instrumental with the band during the time his brother was in the band, with everything from his encouragement of his younger brother and helping get him started on a musical path. Also helping the band with, he worked for Channel 5 as a photographer and was able to get him some opportunities for a video. At the time he worked for them, and then became a videographer, and he was also very instrumental in the Promised Land DVD. Not only filming it, but some of the technical work on it. But he was the closest person to the band, and gave us some really great insights about Chris. And I think most hardcore fans really just want to know more about what's going on with Chris. Mark, just kind of told his story up to the time that he left the band, but we got a lot of really good stories about when he and their younger brother Kevin and their mom, single mom, were trying to just live, and and did a lot of moving around, and kind of they only had themselves, and so they were a really tight knit group, and some just really great stories, and those are the kinds of people that we really wanted to build our story around. We knew that the band wasn't interested, from their lack of communication back to us. And like I mentioned, we could build our narrative around the band with their quotes, but we really wanted to build this story based on fans, family, promoters, peers. We kept, in the main narrative of the book, we kept our personal experiences with the band out. The three segments in the start of the book where the authors talk about Queensrÿche and for their own personal. That was our time to talk about that. The rest of it, we built it around everybody else's experience, and I think it worked out better that way, because we could tell the story we wanted to tell, and we committed to ourselves and to anyone else we talked to that it wasn't going to be a dirt book. We weren't going to be telling all these bad stories and all this stuff that everybody has in their life. We wanted to keep it a positive story about celebrating this band, and that's what we did.
And I in skimming some of the chapters about the less than great things, the legal thing and all that, you guys kept it very, it wasn't just dry, but it was very factual, but it wasn't like reading a court report. It was still good reading, but it was neutral. It was a fair and, fair.
Right. And we're using their words. We're using what they said went down. Right. And so, yeah.
I think, because I have to be irreverent, and I think we're going to end our conversation about Queensrÿche with this line from your book. And this is a quote from Roy Kahn. Do you know who that is? Does that ring a bell with you?
Not necessarily.
It said Roy Kahn, Conception, and ex-Camelot. Is that ringing a bell with you?
Ex-Camelot?
Mm-hmm. Anyway, the quote is, "The two most important bands or artists for me are Aha and Jeff Tate from Queensrÿche. I'm not sure how those two bands can go together. I just don't. I'm sorry." I've been hung up on that for the last 5 minutes, looking at that going, what on earth? How on earth did somebody... Anyway, good on them.
Well, that's art. That's art and music,
Yeah. I mean,
one person's floral pattern is another person's, flat black.
So what's next for you guys? Let's wrap this up with your. Is there another book in the works? You guys are releasing records. What's going on with you guys?
Northwest Metalworks started off as we were doing the Rusted Metal book, and then we did the record label, and yes, we have 7 records out now, and we have one additional record in the hopper. It's already gone to press, and we're in line with everyone else in the world to get our records pressed. A local band from the mid-late 80s called Slaughterhouse 5. And pretty excited about this. They were kind of a, I don't know, goth, hard rock, kind of metally, glittery kind of band. Had some cool songs, had good stage presence. They were one of the bands who played our last Metal Fest show in 19, and I think most people were interested in them. They had the biggest crowd, and not a lot of they really only put out a 7-inch single back in like 1987, 88. So we're bringing almost a full album. It's going to be 8 songs, and It's going to graphically be pretty cool. We've got some good ideas. We have another record.
Now, are these new songs, or are these songs that they recorded but weren't
songs
released?
They had recorded back in the day and not released? That's kind of how. That's what we do. We uncover music from the past that never saw the light of day. So again, we're kind of a bit like rock and roll archaeologists, finding those nuggets and then getting them into the light of the day, as it were.
No, I think it's fabulous. So that's now. Is there another book you guys kicking around concepts?
Yes, we are talking about developing a line of books in relationship to the Pacific Northwest, and so we're rolling around some bands. There are some bands that, a couple of bands from the past that could support just a book on their own. We're thinking that we're probably going to be writing some books that would have 2 or 3 bands, exclusively, kind of thing.
Right.
It's still kind of in its infancy right now, and as much as I'd like to share with you who the next book we're looking at, we're just trying to line up the principles for this one. We would like this next book to be an authorized book, and knowing the people in this band, I think that can happen. I think that it would be welcome, and again, that would just be a kind of another step up, and give it all the credibility that a book ought to have. I'm not ashamed that we did an unauthorized book. Tons of unauthorized biographies are out there all the time. Harry Houdini died 100 years ago, and they're still writing books about him.
Absolutely. No. And, there's no stigma to that.
But it would be great to. There's so much great music in the Pacific Northwest. Even new music coming out. We just happen to be delving in the 70s to the mid 90s, and there's a lot of music still to get out. But yeah, we're gonna keep writing books. We
awesome.
We like it.
We'll have you back on.
Awesome.
Yes, keep writing books. We'll keep you back on. It'll be kind of fun. Yeah. Well, soon it'll be like the Saturday Night Live skit where you get the 5-timers bathrobe. Have you ever seen those skits?
Yes. As long as we're not talking about Schvetty balls and.
Oh God! Come on! Oh my God! I was
okay.
All right. So as we wrap this up, where can people find the book? Where's the best place to get it? Where can they find the records you guys are doing? Self-promotion time.
You can go to nwmetalworksmusic.com. That's Northwest Metalworksmusic.com, and that's NW METALWORX music.com. So it's a little play on words. We have a storefront where our label records and CDs are available. We have a couple other labels that we support, and it's all Northwest music. You can order the paperback book. We still have a few of the limited hardbacks available, and they're all in color.
We're going to put a link to Northwest Metalworks in the show notes. Folks can go there. We'll also put a link to all the other sites that we can find your stuff at. I really appreciate you being on the show, and I'm looking forward to. I'm going to finish this book in the next night or so. And I look forward to knowing more about Queensrÿche than I've ever thought I needed to know, because it's kind of cool.
Excellent.
All right, Brian. Thanks,
Scott.
Join us next time for another episode of the Exploring Washington State podcast.